Good Saturday morning. Thanks for joining us on Power Talk Radio. Time for the Expert Show. And kicking things off for us like he does every Saturday is Luis Alvarez, CEO of the Alvarez Technology Group. Good morning, Luis.
Good morning, Mark. How are you today?
Doing really well. Thank you for joining us. We're talking about a data breach at the OPM, the United States government's Office of Personnel and Management. That's basically where they keep all the records for current and many past government employees. A lot of personal information there. And that data was breached last week, made big news. And Luis, we talked a little bit about it on Tuesday. Did they gain access to the records of all 4 million names that are in that database, or just a portion of them? What do we know?
We suspect, there's no real way to check, but there were 4 million records, and these are employees current and past of the U.S. government. And the area that the breach was discovered gave them access to all of those. So the assumption is that they had the ability to do it. We do know that the breach occurred last year, but it wasn't discovered until April of this year. So the hackers had several months to go in there and roam around and snoop and download things that they wanted to download. And once the breach was discovered, it actually took several weeks before they were able to shut it down, because what people don't understand that it's not just a simple hole that is created, let's say, through a firewall or a user ID that somebody is able to hack the password of. Once they're in, they create multiple other access points just in case the primary one gets shut down. So as a cyber security expert, you have to go through a process of identifying virtually every potential hole that could be created in that system and, testing to see if that's vulnerable. And that takes a lot of time. In fact, that was one of the reasons that earlier this year, if you recall, the email system for the White House, the non-confidential or unclassified email system was shut down because it was so compromised that they just could not figure out all the potential problems that would let hackers into that particular system. So rather than try to leave it up and plug the holes, as they say, one by one, they just shut the whole thing down and said we're going to start from scratch.
Is that why it takes so long to discover these hacks? You said a hack happened last year and they just discovered it recently. Is this typical that it takes so long to discover, we've been hacked?
Yeah, with modern cyber criminal type of activity, the number one thing that they try to do is stay hidden initially. So in the bad old days, a hacker would break into a system and immediately start trying to download information or steal data, and that easily is spotted because you have intrusion prevention systems and other alerting tools that are turned on specifically to look for that sort of behavior. But what these guys do nowadays is once they're in, they lay quiet and they lay dormant for a long time to see, first and foremost, if this is a legitimate hack or if it's something called a honeypot. If somebody created a fake way for them to enter a system so that they can be backtracked and then themselves be hacked. So they take precautions to make sure that, this is a legitimate exploit and they're actually in someplace. And so they don't right away do anything. But then over time, they start introducing different elements that compromise the system to the point where they feel comfortable that, okay, at this point, even if we're discovered, we have so many ways into the system now that if they plug one hole, we have plenty of others until we're done with whatever it is we want to do. So that seems to have been what happened with the folks at OPM. Once they discovered the hack in April, it still took them several weeks to clear it out and make sure that the system was secure. But by then, the hackers have had months of access to those systems. So at the end of the day, we suspect that they did download all the records of those 4 million employees.
What do you suppose they're looking for?
Well, that's the curious part. This is the third or fourth major hack that has originated from China. Whether that has occurred through a government agency, which most people suspect, or if it was just hackers that are based in China, which conceivably could happen. The reality is you got to ask yourself, why are we getting so many records of U.S. citizens being exploited? We had the Blue Shield, Blue Anthem hack last year, which stole almost like 80 million records, we suspect. There was a couple of other big healthcare hacks. So now, all told, the Chinese have information, what some might consider confidential information, on more than half of the U.S. population. So the question is, what are they going to be using that for? Some people suspect, as we talked about earlier this week, that part of the idea is that they can use this data for targeted phishing or spear phishing expeditions, as they call it, where they have enough specific data on a person that they can use that to exploit that particular person. person. But some other people subscribe a more nefarious reason for this hack, and that is maybe the Chinese are trying to learn who in the U.S. government might be susceptible to being recruited as either voluntarily or involuntarily as a spy. They have enough information about somebody's personnel records. Hey, this person's an alcoholic, or this person has been arrested for wife beating, or whatever those records show. They can then take that information and contact that person and say, hey, we know something about you. Unless you start working for us, we're going to make it public.
So this might be something that maybe somebody who worked for State Department or was in a job where they had access to sensitive information.
Classified info, yeah.
Yeah, they could definitely be blackmailed. Maybe not a teacher at the DLI.
Not a teacher at the DLI, but if you had a teacher at the DLI who was a former military member who had at one point had access to that information, and now they have some compromising information about that person, maybe that's what they're going after.
Interesting.
So they can compromise that person and exploit them as a resource.
Or somebody who's a nuclear engineer on a sub or an aircraft carrier that has information about how the systems work.
Yep, exactly.
And what the safeguards are and how to compromise those safeguards.
And a lot of times the way that these recruitment exercises, as they're called in the counter-espionage world, occur is they go after little information. Hey, we know this about you. All we want you to do is give us a list of names of the students that are attending your class. There's nothing classified about that. We just want to know for our own purposes, and if you give us that information, we're not going to tell anybody anything. And then over time, the kind of information they want becomes more sensitive and at a higher level. But by then, you're in so far into the issue that it's kind of hard to extricate yourself.
And you're not being paid either.
Nope.
Unlike the old cloak and dagger spy kind of things where they actually would turn government employees around and turn them into spies that were being paid lots of money.
This of money.
This is the kind of thing where they don't have to pay because they have the goods on people, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems that, we hear about the hacks that happen. Why are hackers so successful? Or are they that successful?
Well, the sad truth is that, the hackers are actually ahead of the defensive side of things because they're more focused and they have a lot of resources available to them. You would think the U.S. government, especially something like the Office of Personnel Management, would be fairly well protected, but these vast networks of information, the amount of data that is available, and all the different points of access are hard to protect against. If you recall the Target hack of a couple of years back where they stole millions of credit card information, well, that occurred because the hackers discovered that one of the vendors, an HVAC vendor that took care of the heating and air conditioning system at Target stores, had access to Target's network and had backdoor access. So those kind of exploits, if you're a cybersecurity expert and you're trying to protect your network, that's where you pull your hair out because you're like, how did that happen? And it happens more frequently than not because people just aren't proactive about protecting their networks, especially in the small business world that we live in. We suspect that we're not OPM and we're not Anthem, Blue Shield, Blue Cross. We're not any of those people. We're a small little company located in Monterey County. Why would anybody go after us? But what you need to understand is on the World Wide Web, everybody's equal. You all have IP addresses, and the targeting that happens is for the most part automated until there's a vulnerability that's discovered, and then that automated system will alert whoever set it on its task and say, hey, I think I found something that can be compromised. And before you know it, somebody's hacked into your computer network and they're stealing user IDs and passwords, and they're breaking into your bank account, and they're doing all sorts of stuff because you just thought, hey, I'm a small player in a very small pond in Monterey County. Why would anybody bug me?
Now, Louis, you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, you also mentioned this on Tuesday, that the hack not only included present employees, but it could have included past employees going back a few decades. So theoretically, does that mean like somebody like yourself who was in the Air Force almost 40 years ago, that your records could have been compromised?
Absolutely. I could be a victim of this, too. And waiting for my letter from the U.S. government that's, I'm sure, coming at some point saying that my information might have been compromised. And I know that part of what the OPM is doing is that they're contracting with some of those identity theft protection agencies like LifeLock and providing them the information so they can monitor our Social Security numbers and whatever other information might have gotten stolen. Mm-hmm. But there's still no guarantee because a lot of this stuff lays dormant for a long time. These guys are pretty smart. They know Social Security numbers don't change, so they can just hold on to them for 4 or 5 years until the dust is settled and then start doing something.
That's a really good point. Of course, it would be anybody who was a government employee, and that would include anyone in the armed forces, whose records were converted into the digital domain. So there may be an instance where, let's say you're an 85-year-old Korean War vet, and the only records that you were in the Army for 2 years, the only records they have on you are paper records in a box somewhere that were never put in the digital domain. You'd probably be okay.
Yeah, I think if you haven't been in government service or in the military in the last, I'd say, 20 years, you're probably in good shape because all that information wasn't converted over. But who knows? As these letters start arriving in our homes, letting us know that we might have been victims, we'll really get a better picture of how much information was really taken.
All right. Well, we'll find out more about that. Anything else you want to comment on here on the program?
No, just that, this is an ongoing problem. I know we talk to clients every week who are victimized or potentially victimized, and it's not a one-and-done type of situation. It really is a dynamic, changing landscape that you have to stay ahead of. If not, you will become a victim as well.
One other thing that's in the news this week, the Apple Developers Worldwide Conference going on in San Francisco. Is that anything we ought to be interested in or paying attention to?
Well, this is where Apple really announces all of their new toys that are going to be available sometime in the fall or during the holidays. And they've talked about how they're enhancing a lot of their technologies. There wasn't anything really new like the Apple Watch that was announced a couple of years ago. They did announce that they're releasing a new version of iOS 9 that's coming out, and they're talking about doing a music streaming service very similar to iTunes or Pandora, those sorts of things. Not a lot of detail, just saying that it's something that they're going to be talking about more going into next year. But for the most part, the sorts of things that we saw were just major or minor improvements to technologies that they already have. So nothing earth-shattering, but just continuing their dominance in mobile space and making the rest of the world try to catch up to them.
Apparently, the reason they bought Beats wasn't just to go into the headphone business, but that's going to be the platform that they're going to build their quote-unquote music service around.
Correct.
And from what I read in one of our industry publications called Jockline Daily, is that Apple Music wants to take us back to the 70s when radio was king and DJs knew everything. In other words, their service, unlike, say, Pandora or some of the others, it won't just be like a jukebox full of tunes. They're actually planning on having personalities that are going to introduce the songs, talk about the music, and make it a more interactive type of thing.
I think that's kind of a cool concept because I know I listen to XM radio quite a bit on my car when I drive around, and when I listen to the music stations, they do have DJs that talk about the music, talk about the era, kind of make you reflect back on a particular song and reminds you of where you were the first time you ever heard that song. So sometimes it's great. Other times people just want to listen to music without interruption, and I'm sure that there'll be both things available for the Apple streaming music listener.
But it's an interesting concept to bring personality into it because obviously, they look at the landscape and say, well, does the world really need another automated jukebox full of music? Or is there something we can do a little different here that will make our product stand out and make it compelling?
Yeah, Apple has never been one to follow the herd. They're usually at the front, leading the pack, if you will. So if they think that this is a good idea, it tells me that they've done some research and they've talked to focus groups and gotten enough positive feedback that they think this is a cool way to differentiate themselves from everybody else.
Well, it'll be interesting to watch.
Absolutely.
All right. Luis Alvarez has been our guest, CEO of the Alvarez Technology Group. Online, alvareztg.com. @AlvarezTG is their Twitter handle. And Luis, the toll-free number for the I-Team, especially if folks are concerned about their internet security.
Absolutely. We'd be happy to talk to you and at no cost. So feel free to give us a call at 866-78-I-Team. That's 866-784-8326.
Luis, thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
You too, my friend.
To the weekend.
You too, my friend.
To the weekend.
You too, my friend.
To the weekend.